So I've been organizing the BKK web for like 13 years now. Almost 13 years actually, I saw the date recently. So every month we invite a speaker to talk about something very specific around web design. It can be about development, can be about design, SEO, marketing. So we try to get people with the right knowledge to try to teach people and get talent to go to the next level, basically, in terms of skills and development. So tonight we've got Dylan. I know Dylan for 8 years, yeah. Every time I say 10 years, like no, 8 years. So Dylan works with a lot of government agencies and companies, sorry. And so it's a very unique type of business because the way you deal with it is very different from working with the private sector, obviously. And so it comes with a lot of challenges. That's what Dylan is going to talk about tonight. Ready? Okay, you've got about 30, 45 minutes. Okay. Then we're going to take a Q&A at the end, okay? Okay, guys?
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay. So I'm kind of curious, people in the audience, how many people here are developers who have done work externally for the government, for a government somewhere? Anyone like a contractor outside? Cool. How many people are inside the government, public servants?
I'm an outsource for government.
Outsource?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of like they consult us to
Yep.
fill some feature for the design out.
Still not okay. 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 And how many people work in the government? Are employed by the government directly? Okay. Cool. Then I can say lots about things. And how many people are just interested in really, getting down and talking about bad government websites? Okay. It was a bit of a hard topic to come up with, to understand who would be interested. It's something I know a lot about, but I'm not necessarily sure that a lot of other people are going to be interested. So we'll see how we go. One thing I do want to talk about is that I think some of the things that I will talk about apply to dealing with any big company or big bureaucracy. Governments are not really different from really large companies in some ways. So I think some of the lessons will apply. And my goal here is not to sit there and blame. What I really want to do is that I want to leave you guys with an understanding of why some of the things happen and what's happening with trends around the world that can make things better, and is making things better. Okay, so I'm going to kind of break it down into 4 areas. So we're going to look at sort of fit for purpose or requirements where that kind of goes wrong. So basically, why the hell is this website so hard? Why does it suck? Why is it not working right? And in particular, part of that is really about scalability is one of the things that I'm going to talk about. Why is this falling over at this point when it really shouldn't be? I'm going to talk about design, why it looks terrible. That's especially if you're blind, accessibility and so on, and security. A little bit about security. So a little bit about me, my company. My company deals with UK and Australia. I don't do anything to do with the Thai government. I don't work for the Thai government. I don't do any Thai government websites. I may use a few examples of Thai government websites, and that's not because I'm picking on the government here. That's just because I happen to use some of the government websites here, so it was the first thing that came to mind. So that's really the only reason. And yeah, this is some of our clients who've been around for a long time. Yeah, so disclaimer, I think that's what I said. I don't work for the government. And if I say anything bad about anybody's website, I'm hoping that it is explained by why I came about. So let's talk about fit for purpose. So this is anyone who's an expat in the audience, they might have come across this example here. I tried to look for the original one. I can't remember if this is the original one or not, but a few years ago they had an excellent example of it basically would not let you enter any data unless you had an IE web browser because the JavaScript would like try and capitalize everything and it wouldn't let you actually enter any data. So the only way to actually use the form was using Internet Explorer. Another problem I had actually during COVID with their requirements in the way it was designed is that this is, for any Thai people in the audience, I don't know if you know about 90-day reports. Expats have to report themselves every 90 days. And the thing was set up in such a way that it would do like a validation check on every 90 days since I last came into the country. And I missed one, I had to then pay a fine, but then it offset the date. So then it suddenly told me that I couldn't submit it at the right time anymore because it wasn't a multiple of 90 days since I came into the country. So I had to then go to Changwon and do it manually. So that was a nice bit of requirements. The new website doesn't have that problem, by the way. It will let you submit it any time and then they just tell you that it's wrong later. This is a nice one I found. If you can see at the top, it's cambodia.gov.kh. I don't know what they were trying to do there, but it's definitely not doing what it's supposed to do. So the first thing to understand, I think, is that people have this misconception that government is big. They do spend a lot of money. There are a lot of people employed, but government isn't one big organization that has a big IT department. It's a lot of small organizations that don't talk to each other. Departments that we deal with can be like really small, like 12 people. They don't have an IT department. They don't, they're coming to us to say, how to solve this problem, and they want us to solve that problem. And they don't necessarily know the language or how to describe what they're asking for. So you are dealing with literally small companies in a way, small organizations, and helping them out. It's not, like they have these massive resources behind them all the time. So this is a term I came up with. I remember, when I first started dealing with government, someone sat me down and explained how this works. There was New South Wales government way back. They had this digital channel. It was a digital TV channel when digital TV first came out, and the government was experimenting with it, and they had like this government information on it. And it was like a group within the government was doing this. And what happened is that one person complained, and they said, "Oh well, there's no separation of concerns. The government is getting into media. They're brainwashing the people." And that got into the media, and then they shut down the whole program. So there was an example of the government trying to innovate and do something interesting that got shut down by one embarrassing action by one person complaining, right? And if you're in public service, the problem here is that if you're at a company, right, and you do something wrong, like if you're at 7 Peaks and you've screwed up a big project, what happens is that you just go and work for another company, right? You get fired, you move on, find another company. If you're a public service in one country, there's no other public service within that country. You're kind of screwed. You can't go somewhere else, right? That's your career path. So what happens is that you get sidelined. You don't get fired. You basically kind of go to, Siberia. You just kind of get sidelined, and your career is basically over, and you're not going to get promoted or anything like that. So, in terms of a personal responsibility for some of these people who are working within government making these decisions, they have all downside and very little upside. They don't get bonuses based on profit. They don't, So if they make a mistake, it's really not good. And this is, I think, understanding this, I think, is really key to understanding how some of the decisions get made and some of the structures and ways in which procurement happens, because it's all about trying to minimize risk. And this happens in big bureaucracies, whether it's big companies, it works the same. I've worked with some big companies like Bell Labs and stuff. It's not that much different. This was something taught to me by someone in the Australian military. They said the thing about red tape is that someone will come up with this bright idea of oh, we want to improve things by adding this red tape. And the problem is they don't get rid of the old red tape, they just add the new one, so now you've got 2 red tapes to go through. That also adds to cost and complexity. And this is a little bit the same as the embarrassment-driven development. That, again, you don't want to be the one picking the innovative, small little company and then getting burned for it, right? You want to pick the safe choice. So what all of this leads to is that a lot of government development, or at least previously to some of the innovations I'm going to be talking about, is based around tenders. And tenders do have some upsides, but it has a lot of downsides. So generally a tender is going to be fixed price. So that seems like a good thing, right? It seems like a good thing to have a fixed price. You've got a budget, you want to know what it is in advance. But the problem with that is you've got to know what you're building. And some of these people don't know what they're building. It's also a low incentive to fix problems. So let's say that the budget's already been spent. I've come up with a quote. I've answered the tender. I've won the tender, and then 6 months into the project, we're way over budget. It's costing too much. It's like, and I say, okay, so now you have this problem that you didn't anticipate. Do you have any more money? And they're like, no, we don't have any more money. And it's like, okay, so it doesn't get fixed, right? So maybe that, form before where they had the JavaScript problem, maybe there was a contractor who was like, they had no money left to do it. It was a fixed price project. It didn't get done because of that. Often the people writing the tenders don't necessarily have the right experience to write really good requirements and to understand what they should be asking for. And in particular, this is something I've seen a lot is what I call kitchen sink tenders. So that's where you get a whole committee of people together. You ask everybody what they want, and they just put everything down on the list, right? And they put like every kind of security requirement and everything. And that seems like a good idea. It seems like you're kind of covering your asses. But what it means for the other side, as someone answering the tender, is that I might just look at it and go, well, I'm not going to answer that, right? It's like that's just going to cost a bomb, and I'm never going to be competitive. So you kind of, as a company, you have to make a hard choice between saying, I don't think they're actually going to need all this, so therefore I'm going to quote lower than it might actually, what they're actually asking for, in the hope that they don't actually need all this, and they're not going to call me on it. Or you basically cost it for what they actually asked for, and therefore it costs a lot. So sometimes you're betting like that, and you get it wrong, and then you're in a hard position. The other thing about tenders is because of the way in which they happen, it means that people are paranoid about, particularly in Australia at least, about being seen to be corrupt and stuff. So you can't have a consultation. They can't talk to people first. You can't have a private conversation about what it is you actually need. If they write something in a tender that makes no sense at all, you've just got to guess. Or you can ask questions publicly sometimes, and you don't necessarily get a good answer. Whereas, sometimes it would be better off if you could actually talk to them and say, look, I think what you need is this. If you ask for this, you get a much better price and a much better solution. So that's the right. And the other thing is that there are companies out there who are really good at writing tenders. And when you have a really big tender for a big complex project, as a small company, you're not going to get picked. They basically have decided already that it has to be a big company because the risk is too big. But big companies come in and they write really good responses, and those responses have all sorts of clauses and stuff, which means that any single little extra thing that you do wrong, that is out of scope or something, then they're going to charge for it. And then the government also realizes they have to charge for it, so the whole thing becomes very expensive. Right. Okay, so I want to tell a couple of stories. These are both old projects that we worked on, but there's a couple of stories that sort of highlight these points. One's a success story by us, and one's a failure. So this is a website that we did a while back. This is the Victorian SES. So the SES they're the people who respond to emergencies. They do everything else but the fires. So they'll do tornadoes, floods, earthquakes, that sort of thing. And they wrote a pretty good tender, I thought. And in particular, one of the reasons is because they had just kind of come off to this, there was the Black Sundays sort of fires, those big fires in Australia, and they were like very aware of the fact that, when people actually want these websites, then they really need to be up. So they had stuff in there that said, like, it has to be tested, it has to have this kind of load, and it has to do all these kind of things. And they thought about it and they put all that in the tender, which was great. So they'd actually kind of modeled it a little bit. Some of this happened after we won the tender, but you know, they worked out, okay, so the absolute worst kind of disaster, you think about like if you're building a website to handle lots and lots of traffic, an earthquake is the absolute worst thing because everybody gets the signal at the same time. The earthquake, everyone feels it, and the first thing they're going to do is kind of get onto the website, is Google and try and find out about the website, about the earthquake. So you have a massive amount of people coming to one or two websites in a very short space of time. So they were thinking it would peak at about 2,000 people per second. And yeah, it was 840K in 15 minutes is what they estimated. So in terms of actual hits and traffic, it was about the equivalent of, or at least at that time, this was about 10 years ago, it was about eBay's traffic happening within, you know, of 10 billion page views per month, happening within, you know, with no warning whatsoever within a couple of minutes. And you had to sort of go from zero to handling that. Victoria doesn't get a lot of earthquakes, but after we built this, they got an earthquake. So it wasn't a big earthquake, but you know, it shook some buildings, and I think even someone died. It definitely shook people up. So this is what the traffic looked like. And it kind of looks like what you thought. Like we went up to about 200,000 hits per second. We tested the whole thing. We did what they said. That was an interesting experience. How you actually working out how you test 200,000 connection per second is kind of interesting. Yeah, and zero downtime. It all went perfectly. Unlike some of the other websites that crashed even after the second earthquake, even if they got a little bit of warning. So this is an example of where we didn't do so well. So this was a tender that kind of went out, and the problem here is that they had spent so much time working out the legislation. They had this legislation that said that they needed to protect about 3 or 4 deaths, infant deaths, dying in swimming pools, and they're gonna like everyone has to register their pool in New South Wales. Everyone has a pool, has to register it by a certain date, and then they're gonna have to, you know, then there's this whole process of how they're gonna fix the pools and stuff like that. So literally they had like 3 pages of requirements. Like it was a very complicated system. We had to work it out for them. We had to come up with a price. And we had to build it within a very short space of time. And there was definitely no requirements around scaling and everything. So you had to, you know, go through and register your pool and so on. So we were kind of focused on the first deadline, which was when they released it and having the load then. We didn't think enough about the end, which is when you should have thought about it. And if we kind of, you know, had more time, thought about it a bit more, we could have avoided this simply by changing their requirements and telling them that people should not get a PDF generated at the time they register because that will increase your transaction time. They should have got it emailed afterwards. We could have put it in queuing and all sorts of stuff. But it didn't, and the whole thing kind of fell over at the crucial time in the last couple of days when everyone left it to the last minute to register. So part of this whole thing, I want to talk about what are the solutions that are kind of happening around the world to help do this. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about the GDS in the UK. I think the GDS is an organization that came about I think 2012 or so, where the government in the UK, they realized they were spending way too much money on IT infrastructure and having not great outcomes, like having the kind of outcomes that I've sort of talked about, where websites look like crap, they would fall over, they weren't necessarily, you know, everyone's complaining. So they sort of centralized this and said, we're going to do something different, we're going to innovate, and and Australia and New Zealand and some other countries, I think, have generally followed their lead. I don't know about Europe and some other countries, but I think GDS may be one of the first ones in the world to do some of the things that I'm going to talk about. And I think generally most of their initiatives are pretty good. They're not necessarily good for us. A whole bunch of them are bad for us. We get less work because of that. But I'm talking about it from the government's perspective today, not my perspective. So what can we do about this kind of fit for purpose requirements thing? So I think one of the big things they did is they set up these two marketplaces. They have a kind of a services marketplace and they have a software marketplace. And what they also did is they talked about this agile approach. I'm personally one of these people that I think agile is a good thing. I think agile has become this big, huge snake oil selling. Like my wife works for a supermarket. They started doing agile. It makes no sense to do agile within like procurement and other things, but it makes sense within sort of software, and it makes sense for big projects, and it makes sense for what they're doing. So what they did is they created this kind of center of excellence, and they started teaching people how to do agile, and they started encouraging people to do more, to create these teams, and to bring in contractors, and to do more, less fixed price, more per hour kind of things. Do more things internally, bring in expertise when you want, but take the risk on yourself and have the ability to change your requirements as you go, test it, try and make it useful, try and actually, test it, get it working well, make it work well, be able to have the ability to change it as you go. So they have a very, very big focus on doing that. And helping train the different agencies and government departments to be able to do that. So that there's all this, very, very transparent, lots of documentation about this, lots of training. This is the digital marketplace. So you can see that, they have the finding individual specialists. So this is like, if you want a per hour kind of contractor, they have find a team for an outcome. This is like a little bit of double speak to, this is basically tenders. A lot of these are fixed price, but you can find you can say, okay, we want a team that's going to do everything for us, but on a per hour basis. They kind of specify which way they want to go, but they're writing requirements and putting it out there and saying, we need to build this and we want you to supply the whole team. And then they have sort of research and user stuff. And then they also, it's not sort of shown here, but they have another one which is just purely for cloud software, which is a way of sort of trying to have people set their prices in advance in a transparent way. And this is just showing like how much money flows through this. It's a lot of money, and how much is used. So I think the other way that you could potentially solve some of these problems, I think, is that they also are building and having these shared services. They have a shared CMS, which they use for their main website, and they also are starting to roll out more of these services. This is a brand new one, which is a forms system. We were working, we actually kind of have our own product called Pretagov, which is designed around this. It's a kind of a low-code, no-code workflow system to be able to handle sort of government transactions similar to this. But they've built their own that then they have as a central government service that they can then roll out for all these different government departments. And this is a smart thing, I think, for government to do. It doesn't make sense to have the same thing, every department building it differently, using different vendors. Okay, so that's basically a summary of those different solutions to that particular problem. The teams more tenders, trying to focus less on fixed price, and agile stuff. Okay, so design is another aspect. So again, I don't want to necessarily pick on immigration. It's just because I go to that website and it is a terrible website. And as someone pointed out, this just shows you the top of it. If you actually want to find that 90-day report form, good luck. Like, it's pretty hard to find how to actually get it. And when you actually find, there is a button that says 90-day report, but then the button that you have to push after that button is like is not the obvious button at all. there's so many other examples, but sorry for picking on Taiwan's. It's not. I'm not saying Thai has the worst website in the world. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying these are the websites that I visit. So this is a little bit of a history. This is like the GDS that I talked about before was formed in 2011. So one of the things they did first, other than the stuff I talked about before, is they did consolidation. They said, okay, so if you are a government, a main government department within the UK, you are no longer allowed to have your own website. They said, you have to scrap your website. We've got a central CMS. They built their own CMS, which is stupid. Does everyone know what a CMS is? A content management system. So it allows people, like, you know, non-technical people to be able to write content and put it up on a website. They built their own CMS, and it now. Basically, like all the big departments, what they did is, in addition to saying you can't have your own website, they said, we're going to split between a service and content. So service is something more complicated. It's like forms, it's like something that has workflows, something that is going to be like custom coded. So then what happens is that, because normally a government website has those two different parts to it. It has a whole bunch of content, it has publications, it has search, and then you might have a few forms, or like, you know, say the swimming pool registry is a good example of a service. That whole thing is basically a service. That will, so then you'll click on a button, and then you'll have another web application that will be the service, and that will be developed by these Agile process, etc. And that may be in any technology. They didn't say what technology that has to be in, but the content part that has to be on their CMS. If you're a smaller agency, you don't necessarily have to be on this CMS, but the big ones do. And again, this is bad for me, bad for my company. I think it's good for the government. So then this is kind of a newer thing, and something I want to talk about a little bit more was they first of all developed their service manual, which is like, here's how you create services. Here's how you make them look like a UK government service. Here's how they should act and act in a way that is consistent. So you wouldn't be able to just design it any way. They would have forms work in a certain way. They would have how the next button works in a certain way, how all sorts of things. And they would have this process where they would check it for usability and so on, so that, you know, it would have to be approved by the GDS before you could publish your service. Then they went one step further, and now it's the UK design system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about design systems. I think it's quite an interesting concept. And we've been doing a lot of work with the New South Wales design system. So what a design system is basically kind of what I talked about before. It's like how a website should look and work. But it's now a very kind of popular thing. So this is an interesting website. It's called Component Gallery, I think. And they list, and you can see that some of these names, right? Like these are big companies, not just governments, Guardian's a newspaper. And what it does is a design system allows a large organization with lots of different websites and lots of different developers to build something that looks and feels the same. Probably if you're a mobile app developer, you would know things like material design, which is how you make an Android app look like an Android app. Apple has their own design system. So within mobile apps, like that's definitely something that you know, but this is doing the same thing. Bootstrap, I guess, is kind of like a design system. And what the government did in UK and Australia and other places is they now have design systems. They're saying, okay, you can build it with whatever you want, but it has to work and look in this way. What was that? Okay. The thing is that a really good design system is not, Jeremy said this, a good design system is not Figma. And that's how some people think it is. It's just the design should look like this. A good design system is one which tells you when to use things, when not to use things, how it should work. I've seen design systems that talk about how to write the content, you know, what kind of voice to use when you write the content, it can include all of that. It's all about, you know, all the stuff that should go into it and how you make it feel and work like one cohesive thing. This is an example from the New South Wales design system. Yeah, talk about cards and how you should use them, when you shouldn't use them. So one thing, that's what I'm missing. I'm missing the one that talked about components. There was an animation there about components. So one big thing about modern design, web design, and design systems is that nowadays you kind of think about design and web design as components. Like they don't have to be React components or web components or something, but you know, the idea is the same, that you have kind of one kind of design concept that works in a certain way, like a card or a button or an accordion, etc. But a design system should be more than that, but it is a lot to do with components. So accessibility, one of the things that you get, the government, or at least the governments I've been dealing with, have been on about accessibility and WCAG. I don't know if anyone knows WCAG, which is a accessibility standard that you should be aware of if you're making any kind of website. It says what you should and shouldn't do in order to make it able to be heard by screen readers, able to be seen by people with, you know, who aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily have to be blind, but they could be colorblind, they could have low vision, etc. So one of the things you get out of a design system or a toolkit that implements a design system, like if we're implemented the New South Wales design system, we have something that's already been accessibility tested. So it's a really good way to have that sort of something that works well from usability point of view, works well from accessibility point of view, and is going to look and be thought about. Has a lot of thinking going into it. So this is our implementation of the New South Wales design system. We use a CMS called Clone, which is a really interesting CMS. It has a new, you know, Clone 6 has a brand new component editor, which actually works really well with design systems. This whole idea of sort of adding blocks and components and stuff has actually been, you know, it's a really interesting experience, and it's all sort of what you see is what you get. So it works really well with the design system, I think. And we should be going live with our first site on that pretty soon. Okay, so the solutions I talked about there, splitting from having the single consolidated CMS for all main government departments, so that it's like, you know, the other thing I didn't say is it's better for the users. It allows the people to find the information more easily. They don't have to go from website to website. It's all kind of there in one place. Versus the services, the design system, and the accessibility. So security. I'm going to say a little bit less about security. I think the solutions are a bit harder. This one popped up, you know, this is November the 25th. This is a couple of days off. Again, don't want to pick on Thai government, but there are, you know, there are loads of examples of bad security holes within. I mean, Australia's just had, they had a major insurer plus the second biggest telecom. They both had massive hacks. So most Australians have now had their identity put on the dark web. So it's not necessarily governments that are blame here. These are, you know, Richard Burrows is quite excited about releasing these. My friend of mine found another one of these the other day and sent it to me, and I could basically look at. It was the TM25, which is another form you have to fill. I could look at anyone's passport photos on that. That was pretty fun looking at that. We got it fixed now, so I can tell you that. But it's, you know, it was another one that didn't get passed on to Richard Burrows, so he couldn't get excited about it. But yeah. So what are the security solutions? So I actually think the GDPR is a little bit controversial. I know not everyone agrees with what they did, but I think it's, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a European legislation that has sort of said, here are the basic things that you should do for security, and if you get caught out and you leak and you're not kind of following these guidelines, then we're going to fine you. We're going to like punish you. So, and it applies to everyone in the world who may have European users. So you can have a website in Thailand. If you're have users who are, it's like, say, the immigration department here, right? They could get fined for GDPR by leaking, by having bad security that let someone's, passport get leaked. And they could theoretically be fined by the EU. But it's written quite practically. I think the best thing it does is I think it's made a lot of different developers around the world aware of some of the issues with holding data. People hold less data now. Before you would just put it in a database and forget it, and then be awfully surprised a few years later when someone found a way in and just dragged it all out. GDPR makes you think twice about that. Makes you think twice about holding data you don't need to. It has this whole thing around, like, if someone requests that your data be deleted and you don't go and do that, and you don't have a way to do that, then you can get in trouble. So you need to think about that when you're building the system. How do I actually remove people's data? So I think it has had a good effect both on governments and private companies with regard to security. UK government has the Cyber Essentials thing. I think, so there's always been security standards. It's ISO 27001 and different security standards and so on. But they're awfully complicated, and I think the Cyber Essentials thing that UK are doing is a lot simpler and more practical. I think it's a lot more modern. And what they're doing is that marketplace thing. If you want to be on there, then you basically, people start asking for it and say, what's your security certificate? Like, the very basic you can get is Cyber Essentials. It's a self-certified thing. It's, you can still lie if you want to do, but, it's reasonably practical. We're going through the process now. And it will help you have better security. It says things like, make sure that you're always on the latest operating system, or not the latest operating system, make sure you're on an operating system that is still patched. And my computer is a 2012 MacBook Pro, and I can no longer use it anymore, so I'm going to have to upgrade because of Cyber Essentials, which is probably a good thing. So again, like, I think these shared services and these no-code platforms and stuff are actually good for security. Doing custom coding in order to create some service that could be done by something that is off the shelf. That off-the-shelf thing has probably had more eyes looked on it. It's probably more secure than something that's custom done. And that was all I had. Thanks. Oh, I did want to say before any questions, I also run the Python meetup. There's a Python meetup tomorrow. Anyone who's interested in Python, it's tomorrow at AIS. So, questions?
Any questions? Yeah, you do.
I actually have two questions, but maybe not exactly a question about what you said, but it's about, maybe it have a context about the Thai government, because I co-founded a studio that have a chance to work with some governmental unit and also the parliament. So the first one is, for my experience, I assume that most of public servants work on the basis of probability. That's why we have a problem of a tender trap. They want to have a clear cut what the final product is, and they try to avoid the corruption, like you said, that so they cannot consult with us before they write the term of requirement. So how can you fix this problem? Because I think the one who can work with us, like you suggest, is the one who work on the possibility basis, because sometimes we need to test, we need to experiment before we deliver the exact product. So this is my first question: how do we cross this border? How do we encourage the one who work for the government cross this border on the concept of thinking? So
I think the best way is what the UK government have done and done it within, had the very powerful department who could tell all these other government departments what to do, which is interesting because that didn't happen in New South Wales. They didn't have that sort of power. But GDS was quite powerful. They could say, like, everyone's got to do this. You guys have got to think about Agile. You got to do this, and they really kind of encouraged and brought the skill level up. I think that's probably the best way. from my perspective, in your perspective, where you're a studio dealing with government, you have less options, but there are some things we've done in the past. You can do fixed price with Agile, like that one that I showed you, the swimming pool register, we kind of did that. We said, it's an Agile project, but it's going to be fixed price. And what it means is that we're going to do these iterations, you're going to test it, but if you want to add a feature and change a thing, then something's got to drop off the end. You're going to lose a feature. It's not the best way of doing it, but it sort of worked. Another project we did where we tried to introduce this is if you can get them to agree to a trial, like to split the thing in two. So you can say, obviously if it's an open tender, like, you know, that basically, like, there's nothing you can do. That's the tender that's going to go out, you can't change their mind. If you can talk to them a little bit, then you can convince them and say, okay, so we split it into two. We have an initial requirements gathering quote, and this, we're going to spend 3 weeks with you doing co-designing, work out your requirements and everything. And based on that, we're going to give you a second quote, which is going to be fixed price. So then they're like, their initial risk is kind of just that 3 weeks, and then they have this kind of, you promise to give them a requirements document that they can put out to tender if they want to anyone else. That's not just going to favor you, but it's going to say exactly what it is they do. If you can convince them to do that, then that's a really good way, because you can actually, you know, really work out what they really need, work out what it is that you need to build, and it's better for you, it's better for them. Because this is the thing, like, it's better for nobody to be building something that nobody actually wants or is not going to work. It's just a losing proposition. And yeah, if you can get that requirements analysis done before a fixed price is done, then the fixed price is not so bad.
What's your second question?
Okay, the second question is about the, I would say, do you think the government should have an in-house team to do this kind of thing, or they can use the outsourced team? Because I think mostly now in Thailand they use the outsource for when we redesign the website, and we see the problem that they change the vendors every time they hire a new project, or they come up with a new idea or problem, and the problem is the new vendor don't want to mess up with the existing system, so they try to create a new thing, and now it's like a big bulk for the government website.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen that a lot. I'm kind of in two minds about it. I mean, like, so for instance, we've dealt with government departments whereby, like, we deal with the business part, and they would have, you know, an IT team, and we would essentially be sort of competing against the IT team. So they wouldn't want, the business people within the government that we were dealing with wouldn't want to give it to the IT team, because they know that that would just take absolutely forever and just be a bad solution. They could get it done quickly with us or another external vendor. And I think some of the things that GDS have done, like, you know, for instance, when I talked about how they would have to approve every service and stuff like that, some of that's gone now because, you know, it just was too much, it took too long. That's part of the problem, is that you're not utilizing the innovation and the speed that companies can work if everything's internal. I think that part of what they're talking about there with having these mixed teams and having, say, your stakeholders be part of the team, and then maybe bringing in like someone who's a requirements engineer or a, you know, business analyst or product owner, and then bringing in developers and stuff, I think is a good way of doing it. That's sort of, you can bring the right skills to the table, but it's not fixed price anymore, and it's not just handing all responsibility over to the vendor. I think that's potentially a good way of doing it, and then you can potentially get it done faster. But you no longer have a fixed price in that case, so you then have to take more risk, and that's the hard thing for the government to accept.
Thank you.
More questions?
Regarding to the data leak, it's have a penalty in the Europe, right? And how about in Australia? I heard that it's have a leak in Optus and Medibank. Any penalty, and how can they solve this problem?
They don't have the same legislation. They don't have a penalty. uncertainty. It's something kind of being discussed because everyone's going like, how can they have screwed up so badly? How can it have caused so much problems? And there's no comeback, you know, for them. So, yeah. Again, the GDPR is controversial, but I do think it does make people think. It's a good idea.
But you told that if some European people get some leak, so that means if that European people is the authors of the bad client and the data is out.
Yes, in theory, yes, they could find them. Maybe they could. Maybe that's one way Australia could force some penalties for those companies. I don't know that GDPR has actually fined that many companies. I think it's more of a threat. The fines are pretty huge. And there's been a lot of data.
Facebook has fined about 270 billion on this one. I'm not sure, but I heard about this.
I mean, government's always in a hard position around this, right? Like, I think, they want to have fines in order to motivate people to do stuff, but if it, cripples companies and cripples people, it's not really in their interest to do that. So not all these fines get followed through. I mean, the swimming pool register had a fine if you didn't register. They never once, fined anybody because it was always just a big bluff, right? They just wanted people to register. Thank you.
Questions? Yeah.
First of all, thank you for the talk. And based on the talk, I was quite interested by the CMS part. Oh, sorry. So I was interested in the part where you talked about the CMS for Gov in UK.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if after they have made that CMS, do they still hire external vendors to design forms within that CMS, or do they just do all in-house?
So the idea with the CMS is to have a split between services, which are basically things like forms. So the CMS itself didn't have forms. So this is the thing, we build websites that have both, and we loan and you can use Drupal or whatever it is, and they have form systems or WordPress. They're thinking about it a different way. All you can do on their main system is put in content. You can have files, you can have images, you can have content, and the main UK government website, that's all it has. And if, as soon as you want to say apply for a passport, for example, there's a button that says start application process, and then it takes you on to another website, which looks the same, it's using the design system, and all those forms, but that could be written in something completely different running on different servers. It's not the same thing. And that whole Agile process of having teams and all the rest of it, that's all about creating these services. Because they realize that that's where a huge amount of money is, right? Creating the services, all these kind of complicated workflows with forms and all that kind of stuff. That, so they made that split between the two. And I think that was a smart way of doing it. Having everything within one technology stack doesn't give you as much flexibility. And by the way, Australia...
Sorry, more secure as well, right? It's separated for the forms to go somewhere else. It's more secure as well, right?
I guess so. I mean, it means that all the logins and everything that are to do with content are not associated with the data that's going in. So yeah, possibly there's kind of less people around that. That's true. I think that you've still got a problem around security. So if you've got a vendor that creates a service for passport applications, that still has to be something that has to be vetted for security and so on, to make sure that it's secure. And they don't say what language that has to be dealt with. By the way, one thing I didn't mention, the Australian government has gone a different way on this. The Australian federal government, they said, we're going to just mandate Drupal. Everything's got to be Drupal. And they created this kind of hosting service and everything where you can get your websites hosted with this government hosting service, which is in some ways not so good for security because it means that as soon as there's a 0-day Drupal bug, it means that every single government website will get hacked at the same time. It's not necessarily a good idea. And I'm not just saying that because I don't like Drupal. Plugins a lot better, but you know. So yeah, does that make it clearer about the services?
Yeah. So I'm wondering about if they still like hire external vendors to design system based on their CMS or not, or do they?
I don't know. I would imagine that they have contractors doing that. I know it's based on Ruby. I don't know exactly how it was built, but it would have been a combination of contractors and internal people, I think. So
What are you asking?
the actual central CMS.
Yeah, I was just wondering if now that they have a CMS, where I would imagine that other government agencies would be able to make forms on Gov in the UK much more easily than without the CMS. So I was wondering if like they have changed the process to let the agencies build the form themselves, or they still like hire external contractors, something like that.
So if you have a look at, where is it? Right, so that's gov.uk, that's what it looks like. So you can see that you can go to education, etc. I should have actually put a picture of what it looks like to go to a service. But if you have a look at, where was it? So they've just launched their form service, which is not, it's a separate thing from their CMS, this thing. So they just launched this, and they, you know, I don't know why it took them so long. It's not that complicated to have a form builder, but this is their form builder, which is a government service that they build. You know, again, I don't know what technology stack it is, but it lets essentially agencies create their own forms with a certain amount of workflow using no code by themselves. And it's a separate thing than a CMS. It's like. They have a few of those services. They have an identity service, so you can hook up and have central identity. They have a few different kind of shared services.
Thank you.
Let's wait 5 minutes for one more question. Yes?
I can go to the bar.
Huh?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay, the next event, you can pre-touch and run now. Yeah, the next event, December 1st, right?
Yes. December 1st is tomorrow.
You want to take over that one?